There's a particular kind of laughter that lives in war. Not the kind from relief, or brotherhood, or the dark joke a man tells himself at 0200 hours when the generator dies and the comms go sideways. I know that laughter. I've been that laughter. This was different. This was the kind men use as a weapon, slow, deliberate, the sound of a group that believes it has already won. I guess, heard it once before. And from a patrol commander in Kandahar who laughed at a local girl blocking a checkpoint road. He stopped laughing about 40 seconds later, for reasons I won't detail here except to say he ate the rest of his meals standing up for a week. I thought I understood what it meant when men laughed at someone smaller. I was wrong about the size of what was about to happen. Her name was Sergeant Dara Vasquez. Then she was standing in a courtyard in the gray Mosul morning with 6 enemy fighters forming a loose, grinning ring around her, their rifles low, their confidence obscenely visible. The posture of men who have already decided how a story ends. She looked at them, and she smiled. That's the part I keep coming back to, every time I try to write it in the incident log and end up staring at the blinking cursor for 3 full minutes before closing the laptop. The smile. Not defiance, and not performance, to be honest, and something quieter and more dangerous than either. Like she recognized, to be fair, something in that courtyard she had been waiting a long time to find. What happened in the next 11 minutes won't appear in any official debrief. This is the only record. I keep a log. Not actually the official kind. The typed up, sanitized, a filed with command kind where everything gets flattened into timestamps and grid coordinates and phrases like contact was initiated and situation was resolved without further incident. I mean, a personal log. Plus, spiral notebook, black cover, ballpoint pen that skips on the letter K, so every word involving knowledge or kill or kneel comes out looking slightly strangled. I've filled 9 of them since my first deployment. The habit started as a way to manage insomnia. It became something else. I write because I don't trust my own memory anymore. I write because sometimes the thing that actually happened and the thing command decides happened are 2 different countries, and I need a passport to the first one. I was writing in it the morning Vasquez entered the courtyard. We were embedded with an advisory unit 3 kilometers north of the Tigris, occupying an upper floor of a half-collapsed textile warehouse that smelled permanently of mildew and burnt plastic. Our job, officially, was ISR support. Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. Sitting with optics, logging movement, feeding data, up the chain. Unofficially, we'd been babysitting a weapons cache handoff that had been delayed 4 times in 6 days because the intermediary kept changing his mind about which god he was loyal to that particular morning. Now, I was on my 3rd cup of coffee that tasted like hot copper wire dissolved in regret when Sergeant Keller came up the stairs 2 at a time and said, with the particular flatness of a man describing something his brain hasn't fully accepted yet, "Sir, Vasquez." Went into the north courtyard. I put down the cup. She what? Alone, sir. About basically 4 minutes ago. 4 minutes. The walk from our position to the north courtyard was 90 seconds. Whatever was happening in there had been happening for nearly 3. Why? I said. And I want to be precise here, because the word came out not as a question but as a sound. The particular sound a man makes when he understands that something has already been set in motion and asking why is the closest thing to prayer he's left. Keller's jaw worked once. She heard them, sir. TBH, through the wall. They had one of the local women. Plus, the woman from the market. The one who sold us the bread yesterday. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. I grabbed my rifle and went down the stairs. The north courtyard was a rectangle of cracked concrete, enclosed by 3 standing walls, and one that had been reduced to a hip-height crumble of brick by something that had happened here before we arrived. The open side faced a narrow alley that fed back into the main road. It was not a defensible position. It was barely a position at all. Just a box that used to be a room before the ceiling fell in. I came through the alley at a jog and stopped. 6 of them. I counted fast, and then counted again because my brain resisted the number. 6 enemy fighters, spread in a loose circle maybe 8 feet across, weapons angled low. Casual, that was the word. They had the posture of men who weren't yet done enjoying something. In the center of the circle stood Dara Vasquez, 5'4", combat kit, a rifle slung across her back because she'd let them take the draw advantage. This detail hit me like a tripwire, the understanding of what that choice meant, though I didn't have the full picture yet. Her hands were at her sides, not raised. Not balled, just open, slightly forward, the way you'd hold them if you were walking on ice and wanted to feel the balance of the air. The local woman, late 40s, gray headscarf, eyes like 2 bruised fists, was pressed. Against the far wall, and not in the circle but adjacent to it. Watched, but not held. The way you park something you intend to return to. The man directly across from Vasquez was doing most of the talking. I'll call him the talker. He was built in that horizontal way of men who lifted heavy things for reasons unrelated to fitness, wide across the chest, neck like an architectural feature. He was grinning and saying things I couldn't fully translate from where I stood, but whose meaning required no translation. Then he gestured at her rifle and said something. One of the others laughed, and then another, and then all sort of them collectively, the way a wave completes itself. That slow, certain, weaponized laughter I described at the start, the sound of men who believe the story is already written. Vasquez pretty much looked at the talker. She smiled. Not at him. Not for him. The distinction matters, and I'm aware I can't fully explain it. It was basically, I'm the smile of someone who has just confirmed a suspicion they've been carrying for a long time. The specific expression of a woman who walked into a situation already knowing what was inside it. I think. The talker's grin flickered. Plus, just for a second. A brownout, not a blackout. The power dipped and came back. He said something sharper. She tilted her head exactly 1 degree to the left and waited. I should have moved. Command protocol, tactical logic. And the entire architecture of my training said, move, establish position, call for backup, don't let a lone soldier remain in a multiple contact scenario with no support. Every synapse I owned was drafting the order. I didn't move. I'm not proud of that. I've typed and deleted the explanation for it in this log 4 times. The closest I can get is this. Something in her posture told me that moving would be the mistake, that the space she'd built around herself in that circle was load-bearing, or that if I entered it, I would collapse something she had spent 4 minutes constructing with nothing but body language and a smile that had already cost the talker 1 flicker of confidence. So I held. Keller materialized at my shoulder. He'd followed me down, and I put a hand out flat without looking at him, and he stopped. We watched, which the talker made his move. He stepped forward, closed the circle by half its diameter, reached out to grab her rifle strap. What happened next took 4 seconds, and I've broken it down into individual frames because my brain won't let me see it any other way. Frame 1. She didn't step back. She stepped into him. Inside the grab, inside his reach. Which is the place a big man expects you least, because a small person's instinct is to create distance, and she had just obliterated that expectation. Sort of. Frame 2, his wrist. She didn't take it. She redirected it, a movement so specific it had the quality of a word in a language I didn't speak, but could recognize as articulate, and suddenly his own arm was the problem he was trying to solve. Frame 3. She was behind him. I don't have a clean account of the transition. It happened in the space between 2 frames, like a cut in footage where the camera blinks. Frame 4. The talker was on the ground. Not unconscious, I saw him move, but definitively on the ground. and in the specific position of a man whose body had been introduced to a new fact about itself. I guess 4 seconds. The circle exploded, not outward, inward, the remaining 5 converging, which was the obvious move, and also, I understood a half-beat too late, exactly what she'd accounted for. The next 60 seconds are where my log fails me. I've tried 3 times to write it linearly, and the problem is it wasn't linear. It was 5 separate things happening at overlapping intervals, and Vasquez moving through them not as a target, but as a variable, the element the other 5 kept having to recalculate for. She took a hit. I saw it. One of them got a forearm across her shoulder. That snapped her sideways, and I felt it in my own sternum, felt the wrongness of it, felt my hand tighten on my rifle. She went down on one knee. One knee. Out on the cracked concrete. Her head dropped. The talker, back on his feet now, said something to the others. The tone was different, which the laughter was gone. In its place, I mean, something uglier. The sound of men whose pride has been damaged enough to become dangerous. He walked toward her. She was still on one knee. My finger, for what it's worth, found the trigger housing. And then her head came up. Same expression, same tilt pretty much, of exactly 1 degree. You know, she said something, clear, level, 3 words in Arabic that I caught because I'd learned the important ones. I'm not going to write what they were. They were the 3 words you say when you want a man to understand. That his next decision is the most consequential of his life, and that you aren't afraid of either outcome. The talker stopped. One of the others, shorter, younger, the one who'd laughed first, shifted his weight. His rifle came up 4 inches, not a raise, a flinch, in the body betraying honestly the mind. Vasquez tracked the movement with her eyes alone. She didn't reach for her own weapon. She waited. Here is the look, morally difficult part, and the part that sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up for weeks afterward. I'd a clean, basically, shot from the alley, on the talker and on 2 others. Keller had angles on, the remaining 3. Nay, we could have ended the whole geometry of it in under 2 seconds and extracted Vasquez and the local woman and been back at the warehouse before my copper wire coffee finished going cold. TBH, I didn't take it. I held, not because I was frozen, which not because I doubted the shot, because something in those 3 words she'd said, something in the quality of that 1 degree tilt, told me she was navigating something I didn't have the full map for. That pretty much. But shooting wouldn't be a rescue, that it would be a decision made from outside a room whose interior I'dn't earned. I've asked myself since, was I right? I don't know. I write that sentence and I mean it without flinching. I don't know if I held because I trusted her or because I was afraid of being wrong. I don't know if those are different things. What I know is what happened next. The talker, I guess. I looked at her for a long moment. This man who had walked into a concrete box 45 seconds ago with 6 weapons and 6 bodies and all the architecture of a foregone conclusion. And he said something low. A question. Genuine this time. Not a taunt, Vasquez answered. 2 words. Plus, he looked at the local woman. To be fair, then back at Vasquez. Plus, then he said something to the others. Actually, they left. Not running. Walking. Though the specific walk of men who have renegotiated something inside themselves and aren't sure yet where the new walls are. The young one, the flincher, was last through the alley. He didn't look back. Vasquez stayed on one knee until they were gone. Then she stood, rolled her shoulder once, testing the damage from the hit, cataloging it, filing it, and walked to the local woman against the wall. She said something soft. The local woman nodded. Her hands were shaking. The Vasquez took her by the elbow and walked her toward the alley. She passed within, 3 feet of me, and she glanced over without surprise, like she'd clocked us in the alley 15 minutes ago and had factored us into her geometry the whole time. "Morning, sir," she said. "Vasquez. Coffee still hot up there?" I looked at her. The shoulder. The concrete dust on her knee. The expression that hadn't changed once in the entire 11 minutes since she'd walked into that courtyard. "What did you say to him?" I asked. "The 2 words at the end." She kept walking. "He asked me who I was," she said, not looking back. "I, in my opinion, told him." The local woman's sandals scraped on the concrete. The alley swallowed them both. I stood there in the empty courtyard for a moment that felt longer than it was, Keller breathing beside me, neither of us finding anything worth saying. My notebook was still upstairs, my pen that skipped on the letter K. I was going to need a new page, maybe a new notebook. I thought about the talker's face when she'd stood back up from one knee, the quality of the pause before he spoke, the specific recalculation in his eyes, not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it, the look of a man who has been shown that his map of the territory was wrong in a fundamental way and hasn't yet decided what to do with that information. I thought about the 2 words she wouldn't repeat. I didn't need them, and not really. Some answers are complete by being withheld, and I turned back toward the warehouse. My coffee was cold by then. Kind of. I drank it anyway. 3 days after, the courtyard, Command pulled Vasquez's file. Not because of the courtyard. That incident didn't exist on paper, which was my doing, and I don't apologize for it. They pulled her file because of the weapons cache handoff that finally happened on the 4th evening. The one where the intermediary showed up with 2 additional men nobody had been briefed on, and the handoff became something else entirely, and Vasquez made a call in the middle of it that either saved the operation or jeopardized it depending on which version of events you handed to which officer. I guess read her file at 2 a.m., and in the light of a headlamp that was losing its charge, the beam going amber at the edges, the pages taking on the color of old photographs. She was 29, which Texas border country, which explained something about the particular register of her silences, a kind of fortification in repose, the stillness of someone who grew up understanding that the land itself had teeth. She'd played sort of volleyball in high school, which I noted because it seemed incongruous and then immediately seemed exactly right. The geometry of a volleyball court, knowing where bodies are relative to each other, reading the movement of the group. Finding the gap was the same geometry she'd been running in that courtyard. She'd just changed the stakes. 3 deployments, TBH, plus 2 commendations. 1 formal reprimand, filed, then buried 6 months later under circumstances the file described as administrative review, which was the military's way of saying someone with more rank than the reprimand officer had read the actual details and decided the reprimand was the embarrassing document, not Vasquez's conduct. Now, at the bottom of the file, in a section labeled Commander's Notes, there were 4 lines. I read them twice. I tore out that page of my log and started over. The cash handoff happened at dusk, in a half-standing butcher shop at the edge of the commercial district, the kind of building that had been emptied so many times of so many things that it now had the quality of a held breath, a space waiting to be filled with whatever came next. The intermediary's name was Farouk. He was 50, precise, professionally unreadable in the way of men who have survived by being useful to multiple sides simultaneously. He arrived at the agreed time. He was not alone. Plus, the 2 extra men stood slightly behind and to his left, which told Vasquez, she told me this after, flat, clinical, the way she relayed all tactical information, that they weren't security flanks. These men were witnesses. Farouk had brought an audience for something. Mine I was positioned in the shell of the adjacent room, separated from the main space by a collapsed doorframe I could see through in 2 directions. Keller was outside on the street. We had kind of 2 others on the roof of the building across the alley. Vasquez was running the handoff. Plus, this had been decided the previous morning after the courtyard, a decision I'd made and not fully explained to her. And she'd accepted with the specific equanimity of someone who understood that the reason behind an order and the order itself were two separate questions, and only one of them mattered right now. Farouk produced the inventory list. Vasquez reviewed it, in my opinion, and then she set it down on the counter between them. The old butcher's counter, white tile, a brown stain that predated our war by at least one other war. And she looked at him and said, "Where's the third crate?" Not a question. At a location. Farouk's, to be fair, expression did something controlled and brief, like a window opened and immediately closed. He said there were only 2 crates. Basically, she said she knew. He said the inventory confirmed it. She said she knew that too. She picked up the inventory list and held it so the 2 witness men could see it. Said, very calmly, "The weight distribution in this document is wrong for 2 crates. It's right for 3. Someone made a mistake. Or someone made a choice." Farouk looked at the witness men, looked back at her. She waited. This was the thing about Vasquez that I struggled to write in the incident log and eventually gave up trying to quantify. She was not impatient. She had the patience of a geographical feature. A mesa, maybe. Something for what it's worth that had been shaped by an enormous amount of erosion and now simply sat, permanent, in the situation of whatever situation it occupied. Most people, under pressure, I move. They fill silence. They negotiate with the air itself, offer concessions to the blank space between them and the person they need something from. Vasquez understood that silence was tap into, not absence. Farouk broke first. He said something, "Look," to one of the witness men, a short exchange I couldn't follow. Then he said to Vasquez that there might be a matter of compensation to discuss. I gripped my notebook, eyed the ballpoint uncapped, held at a 45-degree angle. She not writing. I hadn't written a word since the handoff started. I was holding it the way some men hold a cigarette they've decided not to smoke. A prop for the hands so the mind can stay still. Vasquez said, "The third crate, not the conversation about the third crate." Farouk considered her for a moment in a different way than he had before. The recalculation. I was starting to recognize it. The specific adjustment people made when they realized that the Vasquez they'd prepared for and the Vasquez in front of them were miscounted. He made a call on a phone I didn't see him produce. 4 minutes later, one of the witness men left and came back with a third man who brought the third crate on. A hand truck, the wheels shrieking against the tile floor, and the sound was the most honest thing in the room. Oh, what came after the third crate is where the morally difficult part lives. The crate was opened. Vasquez inventoried it, quick and thorough. She ran her hands along the interior in a pattern that wasn't random, wasn't nervous, was something practiced and private, a method she'd developed somewhere I wasn't cleared to know about. Whatever she was looking for, she found it in about 40 seconds. She closed the crate. She looked at Farouk, which she said, "This is going to make things harder for you." He asked what she meant. "When people find out you gave this up," she said, "it'll make things harder." It was not a threat. It pretty much wasn't even a warning in the traditional sense. It was, and this is the best I can do in the language available to me, a reckoning. The acknowledgement of basically a cost that someone else would carry. Spoken out loud so the silence couldn't pretend it wasn't there. Yeah, Farouk looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "I've daughters." Vasquez said nothing. He said, "3 daughters." She looked at the crate, then at him. "I know," she said. "I've written and deleted what came next 5 times. The version that made it into my notebook is 2 sentences, and I've left it there, underdeveloped, because every time I try to expand it, I make it into something it wasn't, which was small and human and not explainable by either side's chain of command. But the crate went with us, and the handoff was marked complete. We were 3 TBH, blocks from the butcher shop, moving in the gray dusk through streets. That smelled of diesel and cardamom and the specific alkaline tang of old concrete when the ambush hit. Rear element. 2 shooters, raised, coming from a building we'd cleared on the route in, which meant the clearing had been wrong, or the building had been re-entered after, or someone had known our path and moved ahead of us. All to be honest, the 3 options were bad. The second and third were catastrophic. Keller went down in the first 2 seconds, not dead. I saw him immediately roll to cover, saw the dark stain on his left thigh, saw him drag himself behind the base of a doorway with the particular economy of movement of a man who has been trained for exactly this and hates that the training is proving relevant. But he was out of the exchange. And he was a problem that was going to need solving as soon as the immediate problem was solved. The immediate problem was 2 elevated shooters and a team suddenly pinned against the east side of the street with no clean angle of return. Vasquez was at the rear of the column. She didn't take cover, I want to be. Precise here, too. She didn't stand in the open, braced, heroic, the kind of thing that gets written up later in terms that make it sound like a decision made from strength. It was a decision made from geometry. Plus, she looked at the street, looked at the building, looked at the angle of the fire, and then she moved to the one position that the geometry of the ambush had forgotten, which was the narrow gap between 2 parked vehicles on the opposite side of the street, offset from the column, outside the cone of fire the shooters had set up for the point and center. She moved the way water finds the low path. Not heroic, not reckless, accurate. From that, position, she had a partial angle on the second-floor window of the building. Honestly, partial, not clean. The kind of shot that would be marked on any assessment as inadvisable, as a shot to hold for better, conditions or pass to another element or not take at all. She took it. The shooter in the second-floor window stopped being a factor. The remaining shooter had a problem. The column had used the 3 seconds of recalibrated attention to push forward and up, and now the geometry of the ambush had collapsed in on itself. 30 seconds after the first shot had hit Keller, the street was quiet except for the particular ringing that lives in your ears after gunfire and refuses to leave. I got to Keller. He was conscious, managing it with the grim competence of someone who had mentally rehearsed this scenario enough times that the actual occurrence felt nearly procedural. His hands were already on the wound. His voice, when he spoke, that had the clipped quality of a man, rationing breath. "How bad?" he said. "You'll walk," I said, "and maybe not tonight." "Great," he said. "I hate walking." Vasquez came back down the street to us, moving along the wall, and crouched beside Keller to look at the wound with the same hands along the interior method she'd used on the crate. Assessing, cataloging, which through and through, she said. "He's fine." "I'm fine," Keller confirmed, yet in the tone of a man who isn't fine but has decided that being not fine is a private matter. She looked at me, which, "The first floor of that building was cleared," I said. "Yes," she said, "plus," which means, "Yes," she said again. The word landed between us, and neither of us moved to pick it up. Someone had known our route, the list of people who'd had access. To our route was not long. It had Farouk's name on it. Farouk, who had 3 daughters. Farouk, who had just handed over a 3rd crate that someone clearly hadn't wanted us to have. I thought about the 2 possibilities. Plus, Farouk had given us the route to save us, to give us the ambush information so we could have run a different path, except we hadn't been told, which meant the information had leaked from him in a direction he hadn't intended. Or Farouk had given us the route and given someone else the route, splitting his bets in the way of a man who has daughters. Also, I guess, it has other pressures and is trying to survive a set of competing loyalties that a man like me with only one loyalty at a time would never fully map. I didn't say any of this to Vasquez. She already knew. We got Keller out. I won't detail the route. This log has operational details I'll scrub before I die or before someone else does it for me, whichever arrives first. We got him out, and the crate got to its destination. And Command received the word successful in the morning report with the same bored efficiency with which they received every word. I filed nothing about the courtyard. I filed nothing about the 2 words Vasquez had spoken to the talker. I filed a version of the handoff that was accurate in every logistical detail and carefully silent on the human ones. 2 days after the ambush, before we rotated out of the sector, I found Vasquez on the roof at 0500, sitting on an upturned crate, I looking at the river. The Tigris in the early light had the color of pewter, flat and old, and impervious to our particular era of catastrophe. I sat next to her. She didn't look at me. I said, "What was in the 3rd crate that made Farouk give it up?" She was quiet for a moment. "Actually, evidence?" she said. "Of what?" "Of who?" She picked at the edge of the crate she was sitting on, a small private gesture, her thumbnail working at the corrugated edge, a habit, and something she did with her hands when her mind was somewhere fully occupied. "He's going to have a very bad month," she said. Not of Farouk, of someone else, someone whose name was presumably on whatever was in that crate. "And Farouk," I said. She looked at the river. "Farouk made his choice," she said quietly, not harshly. "The way you'd describe weather, the way you'd describe a river that has been doing what rivers do long before you arrived on its bank and will continue long after." She stood, went back to the stairs. I sat on the roof, with my notebook and my skipping pen in the pewter light, and I opened to a new page and I wrote nothing for a long time. The cursor blinks, and the pen skips. River doesn't care about any of it. Somewhere in the city, and a man with 3 daughters was waking up to a morning that had already changed. Vasquez had known that when she took the 3rd crate. She'd taken it anyway, which I still don't know what that makes her. I think that might be the point.